Welcome back to Track Talk. With this video, we're going to be doing something different. We'll be covering the first week of the 1830 League that started this week. This is a league that was started by, I believe, King Zombie, and the idea is to play some live games of 1830 every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern. So it's a little bit different than the prior leagues, which have all been asynchronous, and it's supposedly going to run for, I think, 10 weeks. So I will link the Discord below the video in the description, and if you're interested in participating, you may want to head over to that Discord on Thursday and see if you can get into one of these games. As I mentioned, this is week one of the league. I was not a participant, but we did have 12 players that were all online simultaneously for a total of three 4-player games. And my intention for this video is just to do a quick recap of each of the games. We're not going to do a deep dive like we usually do, just spend 5-10 minutes talking about the game and then just show the standings at the end of this week. And we can update this in theory each week. In theory, if one of the games is a standout game with some interesting stuff, we can always do a deep dive as a separate video on that. But this week, since it's the first week, we're just going to do a quick overview of everything. So let's jump into the first game. This was game A, and it's played with Riverfiend, MP Coin, Crewmeister, and Nate. Or Nate P, I guess I should say. And because we're going to be doing a quick overview, we're going to mostly skip the auction and just mention that, looking at the auction, it's relatively even except for MP Coin, who's pretty over privatized. He got stuck with the Camden and Amboy after having already bid for the Delaware and Hudson. So he is in a little bit of a tenuous position in the auction, has great private revenue, of course, but depending on how this game develops, may struggle to float a company and then be left with the dregs of the company's bad map position, etc. So that's the notable thing about the auction. As we look into the stock round, the other interesting that happens is that Nate first floats CPR. CPR, pretty widely regarded as the worst company in the game. Not entirely sure why you would pick that one first. And also, it's a pretty high float. So mostly you'll see floats at 67 so that you can buy more shares early in the game. A float of 90 gives your company a lot of cash, but you lock up a lot of your capital in these kind of overvalued shares. We will kind of skip ahead to the end of the stock round here, and we'll just look at the distribution of shares, and we'll note that Riverfiend has the CNO, and he has basically two parasites in MP Coin and Crewmeister. MP Coin really, again, didn't have the capital to float a company, so he elected to jump in the CNO. And generally speaking, jumping in the CNO is a good idea because you can expect it to have a pretty high revenue. But I will point out that MP Coin is operating or has priority right after Riverfiend. So unless MP Coin can ensure that he has priority deal, he is at very high risk of being dumped on here. To a lesser extent, Crewmeister also needs to be a little bit careful. He would not become president in the current situation, but he would lose a lot of his value, which he's hoping to turn into a B&O float, presumably, if this company were to be dumped. So as it stands here, Riverfiend can't dump because he's going last in priority, but if that changes in the next stock round, something to pay attention to. So in the first operating round here, we'll just look at the map. Looks like CNO is building towards Chicago as expected. In CPR, we don't see the CPR start too often, but I suppose if you're going to be playing this game company early, heading to Ottawa makes sense. And you may even have to drop a token in Ottawa. He did buy 2-2 trades, so I think he'll be seeing that. The next stock round, the interesting thing to pay attention to here is priority, and we do see that MP Coin is still heavily invested in the CNO and is now operating or has priority after Riverfiend. So Riverfiend could really kind of hurt MP Coin here with a dump, particularly because CNO is operating last. So if Riverfiend has the opportunity to buy the first three, and then his privates. He'll dump a CNO with, potentially bad track, a single three train at no money on MP Coin. And that's really not the position you want to be in when you have all these expensive privates, because then you're having to withhold with your shares. You could have invested in other players' companies just to buy in your privates. So not great. I mean, it's not necessarily game over, but is certainly risky. A little bit surprised to see him going into the operating round with this kind of tenuous situation. The next operating round is not that notable. We just see nobody buys the three, so it doesn't look like we're going to be set up for a dump. And we may finally see MP Coin sell out and be able to float his own company, which is pretty bad news for the rest of the table, I would say. Playing it slow, he's got a lot of value out of his privates, and now he's going to be able to probably float and start running away with things. In this stock round, it looks like MP Coin chose the NYNH, a perfectly reasonable company to float, and the other players were content to kind of sit on their companies. Interestingly, MP Coin did not try to steal Crewmeister's B&O, so Crewmeister is also getting a gift in terms of a lot of private revenue here. B&O, pretty good company. The private is not good, but the major company is good. And floating it here, you may be able to snag a run into Lancaster. PRR, of course, has a head start on you, so a little bit risky, but not unreasonable to look at that company. Still just a single operating round. If we look at the map, all pretty standard track. Lancaster's been tokened. Number 2 track is consumed. NYNH has opened up the track for the NYC, and the CPR is continuing to lay track to nowhere. I really don't like that company. I'm going to make fun of that all game. We do see the private bought in. Looks like the CNO. No, the PRR was the first company to buy it in. So everyone is able to buy in their privates. And as a result, we should be off to the races here. We'll see who floats what. Looks like we see the NYC float. That company has track laid for it by the NYNH, and then the B&M is floated by the MP Coin. Both of these companies are viable here. This track, in theory, could be useful to either one of them. And I think the NYC needs to make sure that they get some access into New York North via this track here. Also reasonable to try and head down to Reading and Allentown and get a token in Lancaster. But he's going to be fighting against the NYNH and B&M player, who are going to be highly incentivized to cooperate with one another to build a friendly track. So the NYC needs to be a little bit cautious that he doesn't lose out on track actions, because he's competing against a player with 2 track actions for every one of his track actions. We do have 2 operating rounds in this set. And it looks like the B&M has dropped a token in Providence. A little bit surprised to see that. Would imagine that when you're competing against the NYC player, you'd want to try and hold on to that and double token in New York. So not entirely sure why we see this token, particularly because he just bought a single 3 train. If he was running 2 trains, it would make more sense. I'll also point out that nobody has bothered to upgrade New York, and that the PRR player has blocked himself out of New York. The PRR player is Crewmeister, who's thinking about running the B&O in the future, since he has that private. So maybe he wants to set up for the B&O run into New York, but this is not the optimal track lay for the PRR. CNO is just working his way over to link up with the PRR track, and it looks like the CPR may have neglected to lay track, because I think we already saw that track there. Or actually, that's my mistake. He's probably heading east now. All right. And we are into stock round 5. We'll look at the map here. So B&M was able to snag the upgrade into New York, or the track into New York here. And it looks like maybe the NYC player prioritized upgrading New York, which, if that's the case, is probably a mistake, because he's just going to be hitting that with 1 train, whereas the New York and New Haven and the B&M player are going to be able to hit that with 2 trains. And we also see the Lancaster upgrade as opposed to the Reading and Allentown track. Okay. We are facing 4 trains, so still not quite against the fives. And in this stock round, just looking at the game state, looks like Crewmeister and MP Coin are kind of in the lead. MP Coin lacks some value relative to Crewmeister, but has a few more shares, so still in a very strong position and does have good synergy between his companies. Crewmeister, the share deficit's even worse than what it looks like, though, because B&O, two of those shares aren't even paying shares yet. So MP Coin is pretty far ahead in terms of share density. And the players that are falling behind, the C&O player is falling behind. And he has had to, it looks like, withhold twice. He's the one that was dumped on. Um, and oh, sorry, no, he wasn't dumped on. River Fiend was the original president of this company. So he's done a lot of withholding here. Um, must have put himself in brown, and he does not have priority, not even close. So these brown shares might get hoovered up by Crewmeister, which would be a pretty big boon for him. Alternatively, Crewmeister may just look to float the B&O. So it looks like he is going to buy the B&O, and the CPR actually got sold down. I had missed that. So he's buying back up into the CPR. Looks like River Fiend, for whatever reason, decided to buy those CPR shares. Not the most attractive. So we will just look through this stock round a little bit here. I don't want to spend too much time on it. River Fiend does secure those brown shares, so good for him. I think very risky going into a stock round with priority number 3, leaving brown shares available for the other players, but it worked out for him. And then MP Coin, a few bucks for him to invest. He will buy the B&M, his other company. So it looks like it's going to be not too interesting of a stock round. We'll see Crewmeister probably sell down the PRR to continue floating the B&O. He will have to leave the PRR potentially vulnerable to a takeover, but nobody really has the liquidity to do that. And this has been a pretty, I guess, passive game to this point, so I wouldn't really anticipate that. So I think we'll just see the B&O float. Looks like the CPR is continually being bought, and we are 50-50. So as noted, Crewmeister is going to have to sell down to 40% to float the B&O, which leaves him a little bit vulnerable, but I don't believe we see that taken over. B&O is floated, and we are into the next stock round. So B&O newly floated will have to buy a 4 and expose the poison 4. We'll see if anybody's able to buy into the 5s right away. In theory, with a withhold, the B and M could do it. Everybody else, and actually the NYC could as well. But it does carry the risk of having to buy that extra 4. So we may have to wait for the Erie to come out before we see the 5 trains. So we'll skip through this here. Looks like most players are just taking some extra revenue. We do see a token on New York South, which is pretty low yield. You'd rather see the token here, since it's actually not possible for the PRR to be tokened out of New York, and tokening here would hurt the B&O. I suppose we're seeing Crewmeister try and set up for a token with the B&O in New York to consolidate that. So that does make sense. Since he's runs the PRR and the B&O, but track order is going to have to be just right when the 5s break for the C&O not to be able to sneak a token in there. High risk. We did see the 5s come out. The C&O was the first one to buy the 5, so we have brown tiles breaking at the top of the operating order, and the C&O does not have money for a token, so I guess Crewmeister is safe from that. Both of his companies have token money. B&M now has his choice of upgrading New York, but he unfortunately spent his Providence token already, and as a result, cannot token in New York, which is pretty good news for the NYC player. And then it looks like the NYC player, who's also the CPR player, is just linking up his 2 companies here, but already tokened out at Albany, so really just helping the NYNH more than anything. We'll skip to the end of that operating round. A lot of brown track comes out. Looks like Crewmeister did manage to pull off his plan here, so well played to him. I was criticizing that, but that was well done. And Looking at the game state, it's pretty close still between MP Coin and Crewmeister. Crewmeister um, does need another permanent train, and MP Coin is guaranteed, I believe. Not guaranteed, actually. So if this company gets trashed and the Erie floats at 100, may lose out on the 6 train, which would be pretty darn bad for MP Coin, probably game losing. Um, and then Crewmeister also in a position where he may miss out on a 6 train and be required to buy a D. None of the players are in a great position to float the Erie. It will require stock sales, but Crewmeister going last may struggle to find capital for his D train here. So let's look at this. And it does look like Nate was able to snag the Erie. This is potentially dangerous. It was not a high par, only 760. He already lacks capital for a permanent train. He is not in position to pick up the 6 train because the B&M is going to operate before him. So by starting this company, he has actually worsened his train liability in the sense that he has not enough money for a D train, and he actually needs 2 D trains instead of 1 D train now. So he is a recipe for bankruptcy as it stands. And Crewmeister has the liquidity to avoid a bankruptcy, but depending on how this situation evolves between these two players, could see a bankruptcy here. So I did look at this situation in some detail, and it basically comes down to whether or not Crewmeister wants to press for a bankruptcy, because he can force track on Erie. Erie's not safe as a suitcase, and if Nate is forced to have track, he would bankruptcy, and at least with a certain set of moves that I had put into a hot seat game, Crewmeister would actually win. So we'll see here. Crewmeister has 2 track points here with the B&O and the PRR. Obviously only laid 1 track towards Dunkirk, so would need 2 lays here in order to upgrade the Brown and give Erie track, but neglected to do that, and as a result is not going to be able to bankrupt. Well, actually, that's not true. He could bankrupt Erie in this operating round, even with the 1 track lay, if he were to lay the gentle curve here and then upgrade Erie before it operates. So I believe Crewmeister had an opportunity to win on a bankruptcy here, and I will kind of identify, I guess, this set of operating rounds as the key point in the game, because as we'll see, he actually declines to do that. He did not double lay and did not break the suitcase, and as a result, there's no bankruptcy here. So Crewmeister is going to get the D train upgrade, but the liquidity for Nate is going to be enough that he can shuffle trains and survive. So at this point, we have early lead for MP Coin. He also has the most shares after, actually, sorry, River Fiend is technically in the lead right now. But will have to sell down shares of the C&O as he didn't stay brown or orange, lose his stock lead, and then will gradually fall behind for the rest of the game. So I think the crucial point of the game has passed. That was that last operating round when we would see whether or not anybody went bankruptcy. I do think there was a chance for Crewmeister to win this on a bankruptcy, but ultimately we'll skip to the end and see that MP Coin takes the win, and there is no bankruptcy. So that was game A. Some kind of sloppy play at the beginning, and then a questionable decision with respect to pushing for bankruptcy or not, but ultimately concluded without one. We will transition to game B, and game B, also a 4-player game. has a little bit of a different start. And we will again basically skip the auction. This auction was a little bit more even. Wouldn't say that anybody's dramatically over privatized. The interesting part of the beginning of this game is that the B&O player floats himself basically, which locks up a lot of capital and is going to eliminate his own private income by doing this. So generally speaking, if you're the B&O player, you'd prefer to have someone force you to float rather than just take it upon yourself, which gives you the opportunity to invest in the other player's revenue, revenue paying companies. But in this case, he elects to float himself. The other interesting part of the early game is the atypical track decisions made by the PRR player. So unusual to head west, not really a whole lot of revenue out there or incentive to go west. Much more usual to head east towards the high-paying Philadelphia and New York tiles. This is a boon to the B&O player who, as we noted, has floated himself and now is going to be given free reign in Lancaster and Philadelphia in theory. So we will monitor that as it develops. The NYNH player playing a little bit more standard and is heading over to the B&M home. And we'll see if he elects to buy 3-2 trains and token here, or if he's going to play it a little bit more conservatively. This stock round, other than the B&O floating, doesn't have a whole lot going in. So the B&O player, as we mentioned, has free reign over here and decides to lay south. I'm generally not a fan of that, and I think that even in this scenario, when you have extra time, probably not the right move. I think that getting to Lancaster, Philadelphia, and New York is just so much more important. Even if you have a little bit of breathing room when the PRR player goes west, still makes sense to prioritize this area of the map. But regardless, not what we see for here. PRR, interestingly, continues to head west and is actually telegraphing potentially heading up towards the C&O. This is not a very high revenue location. You're going to need a long train to run through this DIT to get this $30 city. And you, of course, can never run through that $30 city, so not the best track. The rest of the stock round is, or operating round is not atypical, and we'll skip that. We do see that the NYNH player has managed to buy into the threes, and he is the only player that bought in his private. But because he had a low capitalization and had to buy so many 2 trains, was not able to buy the MNH for very much and actually only netted $20 on that private. Not the end of the world, but you, as the player, it is painful to leave all that cash on the table. So as a result, he's going to have to sell down heavily the NYNH to float a new company. None of the other players really have the liquidity to steal it from him, as they've all floated their own companies and were unable to buy in their privates, but it does hurt at least a little bit to have to do it this way. We'll see what he chooses. And it looks like it's the B&M. So he did kind of telegraph that by laying track there. He had priority and was able to secure that. He does have a basically depleted NYNH treasury and now a very low float of the B&M. So I would say that this player is flirting with bankruptcy here with 2 low pars, and the other players may wish to capitalize on that by pressing trains and pushing him to bankruptcy. But we will see how that develops. The rest of the stock round is uninteresting, just basically floating his new company, and we will see how the B&O track continues to develop. So he now is heading towards the Philadelphia and Trenton, and we'll have to wait for the PRR player to buy that in. So probably would have been better to head over to Lancaster. PRR is the most interesting part of this early game, and he will actually lay unfriendly track to the C&O. Unclear if he's like intentionally griefing the C&O player, or if he's just interested in taking advantage of this track to get into Chicago. Chicago's revenue, of course, is always nice, but this has several implications. First of all, it kind of kills the C&O's track development. And more importantly, it leaves the number 2 tile open for Reading and Allentown. So the B&M and NYNH player may be able to upgrade NYNH or the New York tile with the B&M, which is operating first, and then with the NYNH, tight curve here, and then upgrade on Reading and Allentown in the next operating round and get access into New York South and potentially Lancaster. So very good position, track position for devouring Trey should he take advantage of it, and all as a result of the decision here to lay this track. If his goal is to block the C&O, he could still throw away the number 2 tile without, I guess, leaving it available to the NYNH player. So that leads me to believe that maybe he genuinely does want to just get into Chicago as opposed to just griefing Cleveland. Hard to say. Don't see this develop very often, so it's very kind of counter to the meta. The remainder of the operating round is not all that interesting. We do see that the NYNH player is neglecting, or I guess foregoing, the opportunity to head down into New York South, which is hard to rationalize because you can double tap this 60 value city, which is kind of the best 3 run in the game. Instead is looping back up into his double dit and potentially setting up a nice little loop for himself. But yeah, you would really like to see the double tap of the New York. So we'll monitor that situation. It looks like the C&O player has pivoted and realizes he can't head east, so he's going to head up to Toledo potentially. The C&O player does have the DNH, which is always a nice little escape valve for the C&O. We've talked about that in several games on this channel before. It's just a nice thing to have in your back pocket playing that company. And looking at this operating round, it does look like the NYNH player has completed his little loop-to-loop. The B&O player, still blocked at Philadelphia and Trenton, has decided to start heading up towards the PRR. And C&O does elect to lay that $80 track instead of teleporting over to Scranton. So I think that that's wasted money. Would much rather see him heading over to Scranton, getting into New York for better runs. This is just a delay in that eventual goal. Stock round 4. HJM Quilter almost has money for a float. The rest of the players don't, and we'll have to sell down quite heavily to do anything. So we'll just see briefly what they do here. Buying a B&M. And everyone is heading over to that B&M stock. HJM Quitter is selling out of the C&O. And we'll par the CPR. So this is the second time this week we see the CPR kind of prioritized over other companies. And just as in last game, not great. CPR is a viable suitcase, and I think that's probably what we'll see here. But you are taking a lot of your stock room and locking up a lot of liquidity and capital for the next 2 operating rounds for that dubious advantage of having a suitcase for the rest of the game. And we'll see if it even remains as a suitcase. Meanwhile, the NYC has had this track kind of laid for it, would have a pretty easy time of getting into Boston, potential time getting into New York. This is by no means a dead company. The NYNH token has been thrown away in Providence, but I don't know that the NYC really cares all that much about that. So potentially a good start there. Now you could argue that the NYNH and B&M player could, upgrade away from you at both of these track locations, in which case you might be dead in the water till Brown, which is certainly a valid point. But do we really expect this player to do that? I don't know. I guess you'd have to have a better understanding of how this player's been playing throughout the game, which is hard to do when we've been buzzing through it. Regardless, CPR player is now in effect, and we'll see what the last player in the operating round is doing. He is investing in the B&O. So it looks like we'll just see a CPR float, and we can go into the next operating round. B&O is up. It looks like the CNA still has not been bought in. Yeah, that's interesting. So we neglected to mention that, but this player is just sitting on his privates, which is going to probably put him pretty far behind the rest of the players. You can see that he's second to last in share count, and second to last in net worth. So sitting on your privates, usually not a good strategy. But as a result, B&O doesn't have too much track to lay, and we'll see if he starts heading up to Lancaster or not. Nope, just going to upgrade Pittsburgh for now. Doesn't need to token there, but might see it anyways. No. So just running his 2 trains for pretty good revenue. And he's probably pretty happy with the status quo. If he gets to run a 3 and a 4 and people just allow the trains to stall at this, he's going to have pretty good revenue for a while. New company here, CPR, does look like he's going to be trying to sit on a suitcase and push trains. So he buys a 4, and we may see that 4 bought over into the C&O. C&O, does he have the money for the Scranton tile lay? He does. So probably he's going to be buying that train over. Should have bought 2 trains probably so that he could shuffle money into the C&O. Otherwise, he's going to have to buy a train across in the next operating round. But let's see. So upgrades Toledo, still in no rush to take advantage of the C&O, the D&H, I should say, which is really his only path forward. Runs for 100 and does buy the train across from the CPR. So this is what I was talking about. He now has $700 in his suitcase, no train. He's going to have to buy one of these trains out of the C&O, lose the run on it to get that money out before he sells down the CPR. So the suitcase is not the most effective. And he now has 6 shares in the CPR, which is never paying, and only 3 shares in his company in the C&O. Yeah, that's a little sloppy. And I think we'll skip the rest of this operating round. Looks like the B&M player is setting up for the NYC, and the B&M player does have priority. So this is only possible because the CPR was chosen instead of the NYC. Next operating round, I think that we probably will not see any trains purchased. We are sitting on 2 4 trains, and nobody is really incentivized to buy that. So we will skip the rest of the operating round, just look at the market here. We do finally see the C&O teleport. That should have happened 2 or 3 operating rounds ago. And he now has competition from a player with 3 companies. So it's going to have 3 track points to the C&O's single track point. And also the B&M and the NYC have double tokens. So in theory, could see them double token New York South and really put the screws to the C&O. On the counter of that, this player with the loop needs to be a little bit careful that the track doesn't get upgraded here to allow the C&O player a token in Albany, which would be painful for his 3 companies. So this is the area of the map to kind of monitor for the rest of the game. Devouring Trey, he doesn't have technically enough cash to float the NYC, so we'll have to sell his B&O, and that may leave his NYNH vulnerable. The NYNH only has a 40% privacy, and JTT is already 20% of that. So needs to be a little bit cautious in how he does things here. Could end up losing one of his companies, but I do imagine we'll see the NYC float right away. He max floats it and has just enough money to do it. That's pretty nice for him. So he's in a very strong position, and we'll see what the rest of the players are up to. Some C&O purchases. JT is floating the Erie, so I think that Devouring Trey can breathe a sigh of relief in the sense that he's not going to be losing the NY and H. 2 new floats with pretty depleted treasuries around the map. Does increase the risk of a bankruptcy, so players should be paying attention to that. JTT, HJM Quilter, he has sold out of the CPR. I think he did that once before. No, that was the last game. This is the problem with commentating multiple games in one video, is they start to run together. So he was the suitcase. He sold out of the suitcase now. He was able to shuffle all the cash out of the CPR and into the C&O. And unfortunately, because of his priority, has lost out on all the companies. So he's going to be basically a one company presidency for the rest of the game, unless someone dumps something on him. And I think that we probably can skip to the end of the stock round since we should just be seeing um, a float of both of these companies. We will confirm that. So Devour and Trey has maintained control of his three companies, and I don't think we saw any presidencies change hand. Looking at the game state, JTT is in first, has one share less than Devouring Trey, and has probably just strictly worse map position. The Erie hasn't had any track built for it. The PRR hasn't really been laying towards high revenue centers at all. Does have Lancaster finally upgraded or laid. So I think that this situation is interesting for the player with three presidencies, and there is no dump available to that player. There is a dump available. Um, so it is safe to have two shares in a company with one share in the market if the president owns six shares, but not if they own five. So this player has priority, and this is a dumpable NYNH. Let's see what the B&O does. Actually, let's just skip through this operating round. So we do see the 5 trains come out. Philadelphia gets upgraded. CNO secures the token in New York. I'm sure he would have preferred the token in Philadelphia, which would have secured basically exclusive access to New York South for him, but probably did not have the operating order to get that. Looking at the trains, Devouring Trey has 2 5 trains. He doesn't have enough money for a permanent train, but as mentioned, this is a dumpable company, so he's all set. HJM Quilter is in danger, has no permanent trains, and has a vulnerable suitcase, which is already being threatened. I'm not sure which player laid this track. It was probably the player with 3 companies, but it doesn't look like that suitcase is going to be secure. So HJM Quilter is in danger here. And then JTT with a single permanent train, but with almost enough cash for a 6 should be okay. So we will skip this operating round as well. And we see further development around New York. B&O is able to secure the token in Philadelphia, so that's pretty bad news for the PRR and to some extent for the CNO. It looks like the 3 company player has managed to sneak a token down in Lancaster, and if he were able to get a B&M token in Lancaster, would pretty dramatically cut the runs of the B&O player. B&M does not have money for a token yet, but could see that come to pass. And I guess the big question is here, is he going to dump the NYNH on him? And it looks like he will, since he has left no money in the company, really. So I think this is probably the key part of this game. Devouring Trey has been able to loot his companies, get great map position, good trains, good routes, and has eliminated his train liability by dumping the NYNH. At this point, he is not technically leading, but he has basically eliminated JTT from contention. And if we look at the other players, I think they all have train liability. So even though Heart of Dior is technically ahead here, does not have a permanent train, and same thing for HJM Quilter, who actually is going to need 2 permanent trains shortly. So spoiler alert, Devouring Trey kind of runs away with this game. The game is not over, but it's basically functionally over. So we will just skip through this operating. We'll skip to the end and just look at the map for a second. The CPR suitcase is broken. I will say that that happens fairly quickly after we stop the game. It does look like the Devouring Trey player was unable to secure tokens for the B&M on either Albany or Lancaster, so that was kind of bad news for him and gave the other players a little bit of an opportunity, but this corridor here is such a mess of mixed tokens that basically no company has any good runs through here, which is really good for someone that's running 5-trains and competing against players with D-trains. You know, if your D-train is running as a 5-train, you've basically lost all the advantage of that very expensive train. So well played, Devouring Trey. I think that dump secured him the game, but he may very well have won the game even without dumping the NYNH because of all the synergy he had and good track development he had. So that concludes game B. We will enter into game C here. Game C features King Zombie, who is the player that's running the league, and we will, as we have done in the past, kind of skip through the auction for time's sake. The auction features another kind of over-privatized player. I think this was the same thing we saw in Game A, Camden and Amboy and Delaware and Hudson. But this works out slightly different because the other players basically allow King Zombie to get a float here anyway. So the PRR has been stolen. NYNH is floated, and King Zombie, I think, ends up going back for the C&O. Just waiting for that to occur. Yep, so we see the C&O. He has no chance of floating this, but gets a little gift from the B&O player who decides to start capitalizing his company. So we ultimately do see a 3-company float. This is a bad idea for a number of reasons. So you know, if you're playing against a player who invests 40% in a company and is unable to float it, they have, you know, 200 something dollars of their 600 starting dollars locked into that company, and they're just relying on their private revenue to get them over the hump to float their first company. They can't buy in their privates until it's floated. It's just really a stalled position for that player. So now you've basically, you know, help them out of that stalled position. And then particularly in this case, it's even worse because Pseudostock is behind King Zombie in priority. So he's opened himself up to a dump, and C&O is going to be operating last. So it's the company that's most likely to buy in its privates first. It's most likely to be in a dumpable position. So this is really not a great decision early in the game to float the C&O. We will conclude the rest of this stock round. And I'm not sure where my button has gone to skip. So I'm going to pause and see if I can get that back. Okay, I've made it come back so we can kind of skip through this first operating round. In terms of track development, it's pretty standard. Last game we saw the NYNH go to the B&M. This time he's going to the NYC. We see heading towards Chicago and heading towards Lancaster, all very standard. And it looks like everybody just bought a single 2-train. So while Pseudostock is at risk of a dump, we're not going to see it here in this stock round. This stock round, players are mostly just investing their cash. We don't see another company float, and the track continues to develop in a pretty standard fashion. Lancaster gets tokened, NYC and Chicago complete their destinations. Finally, Pseudostock would be in a position here to float if he sells out. And unfortunately for King Zombie, he wasn't in a position to buy in his 3s. So we will not see that dump, although it was threatened for sure. So King Zombie will buy a C&O, and then we should see Pseudostock selling out. But in fact, I must be misremembering. He is further investing. And it looks like everyone else is content to pass. So I guess we will see a little bit of a stall here until the next round of companies float. It does look like the C&O is now able to buy in his privates and was not able to buy in both of the privates, but got in the expensive one. And we do now see the dump. So this is what we were kind of worried about. It was an operating round later than I had expected, but this is something that was pretty easily avoidable from Pseudostock's perspective. And he could even have, I believe, floated his B&O last operating round instead of putting himself in this position. So King Zombie is now really off to the races. This is what is so dangerous about the C&A, is the idea that you can buy it in for max value, then potentially dump that company and have no liability, a very healthy treasury, and basically all the freedom in the world. We will see what he takes. He takes the NYC. The NYC has been laid track by the NYNH, so reasonable. I also think that taking the B&O is a reasonable action, especially when the Philadelphia and Trenton track has been laid friendly for you. But not what we see him decide. The rest of the players do also have cash. DAK is also in a position to float, so let's see what he does. He is selling out of the PRR, which I don't believe he needed to do to float, but looks like he's looking for a max float, probably hoping that this company is not stolen away from him. PRR does have good map position. Even though its treasury is depleted, he would be able to resuscitate that with his new company. So he is going to sell out of the CNO for even more cash. And he is just buying an NYNH for now. So he will be floating the company. He has too much cash to really do anything else, especially now that he's sold out of 2 companies. Just looking for a little extra cash, I suppose, and maybe some friendly stock trashing. In terms of the companies remaining, I think he's probably going to be looking at the B&O. Cottongrass selling out of the PRR, which is ledged, and he is going to help float the NYC. Okay. King Zombie, he is going back for the PRR. So this is interesting, right? King Zombie has sold out of the CNO and is now going back to threaten the presidency of the PRR. PRR probably slightly better map position than CNO, but less capital, and it's also not a brown company. So, you know, it's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of another in terms of trading those 2 companies. He may be throwing away a little bit of advantage here by re-gifting himself some train liability. NYNH is being sold down by Pseudostock. DAK is probably upset about that. He had bought that share earlier, and I wonder if he was buying these shares with the intention of selling them down to reduce Pseudostock's ability to protect the B&O. But it looks like Pseudostock maybe saw that coming and has preempted him and sold out first. He's not buying any shares, so I'm not entirely sure where he's going with this. DAK now does dump the PRR, so we do see the swap. King Zombie has gone from the CNO to the PRR, and DAK should be now buying the B&O, correct. Cottongrass, he's kind of out of cash, and King Zombie has secured his presidency, probably doesn't want to buy any more of the PRR and just needs to go back to floating his NYC. And we will see if DAK is successful in stealing the B&O. He should be. Pseudostock is going back to defend, but really doesn't have the capability to do that. And Pseudostock doesn't even really try, sits at 3 shares. This does leave DAK with a 40% presidency, which he's probably happy to maintain. $1,000 with only 40% invested is a pretty darn good deal. And NYC is now floated. Pseudostock buys an NYC. DAK going back for an NYNH. And it looks like the only player taking actions is now DAK. In theory, NYNH could be dumpable since he's giving Cottongrass priority. However, it's the only presidency of Cottongrass, and he has no privates left to buy in, so pretty safe investment and should be a pretty reasonable revenue source. He has now floated that company up and is basically out of cash, so we're into the next operating round. We see the B&O operating, probably just wants to head over to Philadelphia. It's a guaranteed run for him, and he wants to get there eventually anyways. Instead heading towards Lancaster, so that's a little bit interesting because the PRR player can fairly easily block him, and especially when the PRR player is also the NYC player, you have to assume that this player is interested in heading up towards Reading and Allentown as soon as possible. So this is probably not the safe track lay. It's definitely not the safe track lay. It's probably not the optimal track lay. You can be pretty confident that he's not getting into Lancaster. Buys a 3. And the NYC is now heading over to Rochester instead of heading down towards Lancaster. I think when you own the PRR and the NYC, you want to link them up as soon as possible, secure that token in Lancaster with the NYC, which is going to be very strong and almost certainly get you great late game runs for at least one of your companies. If he was able to secure a token in Lancaster with the NYC and a token in Albany with a PRR, I think that's a very hard position to lose from. Buys a 3, shuffling trains, and we should be seeing the 4 train come out here very shortly. Albany's upgraded, so he has lost out on the ability to token there with the PRR, which is not unusual at all. But he still, I think, should have headed down south instead of towards Rochester. This is really not a priority for him in this game. Buys a 3, PRR, does get the upgrade. Either of the upgrades, the K or the X, would have blocked the B&O. So the B&O is still going to be able to upgrade the straight green tile here to get into Philadelphia and Trenton, but this sharp turn was not high yield. Runs his 3 train, pays it out. And the C&O has a bunch of trains, but with a single token is not going to be able to run those all, so may want to grab that Lancaster token to... Oh, sorry, he already laid the track. So this H8 track, he's not going to be able to token anywhere until next operating round. He does withhold on the C&O. He's pretty cash poor, but he controls 80% of the revenue, and he does not have priority. So putting himself into brown is pretty risky. Now, with a payout in the next operating round, he's still safe, but needs to be aware that that company is going to be flush with cash and easily stolen if he continues to withhold. We're into the next operating round, and now that we have seen this token and none of this track developed, I think we can just skip to the end of the operating round, look back at the track. So it looks like probably the NYC player continued to head over to Rochester for whatever reason. He does not have priority, is in a position where he could potentially float the Erie, but the Erie is not going to have good track. And the C&O did secure the token in Lancaster. So the C&O is in a decent position and is about to be stolen. Because he withheld twice, put himself in brown without priority. So this is a no-brainer for Cotton Grass. Should absolutely just snap up that company, which he does. $250 in the treasury, not too shabby, and pretty much the cheapest shares you'll ever get. So that is a huge, huge gift to Cotton Grass. He has leapt ahead in terms of share density. Does have some train liability to be aware of, but the NYNH is pretty healthy with $440. C&O is not too shabby itself. One withhold will put it pretty much in permanent train money, and is really probably happy with the way that worked out. So big mistake from Pseudostock there. I would say that this is probably one of the key moments, if not the key moment in the game. Losing that company is huge. The rest of the operating round, or stock round, we can kind of skip through. The Erie does not end up getting floated. King Zombie just spreads his cash around. He does have a pretty tenuous control of the PRR, but it doesn't look like anybody's challenging that. We do see a float from the CPR. So Pseudostock lost control of the C&O and then floated the worst company in the game. And the rest of the players are just kind of continuing to build track and waiting for Pseudostock to break through another of these 4s so they can start buying permanent trains. NYNH heading towards the Erie, and I don't think we're going to see too much interesting stuff in this operating round, so I think we can skip to operating round 2. We see the green New York upgrade, the token in Philadelphia from B&O. B&O definitely doesn't want to lose control of this tile. There's no guarantee that it gets upgraded to New York, but if it does and then someone tokens it, he's going to be in a world of pain. So reasonable to token there, although you never are super excited about that. And NYNH and NYC have created their little loop where they can double tap New York if they have two trains, which is pretty common. We will skip into the stock round, and it does not look like we saw a 4 train come out, or sorry, a 5 train come out, but with the B&M and the Erie available to float, we should be seeing that into next operating round. And the events of this stock round are pretty key here. So DAK is going to sell out of the NYNH for a float of the Erie. So we are definitely seeing a new company float here. And then we're going to skip ahead towards the end of the stock round here and just note that the DAK player was able to steal the PRR. King Zombie could have defended that, but neglected to. So DAK ends up with priority, and he has 3 companies. All these companies have decent amounts of cash. We're facing down the 5 trains here as soon as this 4 train's bought, and King Zombie is in a position where one of these companies can be dumped on him, the PRR. So that is a pretty big mistake. You can defend the presidency, and if you fail to defend the presidency, you definitely shouldn't leave it in a dumpable position. So that is, I guess, what I would call probably the defining feature of the game. We can go through this operating round and just look at things briefly, but DAK is set up for the win now. The 5 trains have come out. DAK only secured one of them. When I was looking through this game in more detail, he could have secured 2 of them, which would have put even more pressure on the other players and potentially resulted in a bankruptcy, but he did not. Regardless, DAK now has 2 permanent trains, and spoiler alert, he's going to dump that PRR. So he's going to be fine, and he's already in second place. The person he's dumping on is the person in first place, so he's going to secure the win with that maneuver. When we look at the game state here, $0 in the PRR, that's heading over to King Zombie. So even though he's $200 ahead, he's going to be pretty rapidly forced to buy a D train, and DAK with the D train in the B&O has really good runs for himself. His Erie is also not too shabby, so he is set up for victory at this point in stock round 7. We'll skip ahead to the end, and we see that DAK wins this by a very comfortable margin. So some kind of sloppy play around the stock round and company dumps this game really determined the outcome here. Well played to DAK. I think he navigated that well. So that concludes all 3 games here. And if we pull up the standings, we'll just talk about the scoring for a moment. This is pretty small. I might have to zoom in. So hopefully that's more visible. Basically, the way the scoring works in this league is that you get 1 point for showing up. So everybody that was in these games gets 1 point. And then for winning, you get, I believe, an additional 4 points. So the winners end up with 5 points at the end of the week. And then the other things to note is that if you say you're going to play a game and then no show, you lose 2 points. There's no other way to lose points in the scoring. And if you are, for some reason, assigned a bye week, you are assigned the maximum points for that week, which is 5. And then if you get a bye week and then play a game as an alternate, which I'm not sure in what situations that would arise, you not only get your 5 points, but you also get additional points for how you place. So apparently you can get up to 9 points, which could be a pretty big deal. So I will try and update these standings as the weeks go by. Currently, the winners of the 3 games I played are, of course, in first place, and everybody else is in second. This is a kind of uninteresting standing, but I think that next week we'll see things shake up when we have hopefully more players and hopefully some new players winning. So we will see if anybody is able to start opening up a lead early in the league here. So thanks for watching. We will continue to monitor this league and update you as it develops.